Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
Last Tuesday was supposed to be a simple day. I had the day off and needed to run some basic errands. Pick up my dry cleaning, grab groceries, maybe browse a few shops on Main Street. Nothing fancy, just the usual stuff you do when you finally have a free afternoon. I was walking down the sidewalk after hitting up 3 different stores when something caught my attention. There was this teenage girl walking toward me, and what struck me wasn't anything dramatic. It was how confident she looked. She had a white cane in one hand and was wearing dark glasses, clearly blind, but she moved with this incredible self-assurance. You could tell she knew exactly where she was going and how to get there. It was actually pretty inspiring to watch. I slowed down a bit, not to stare, but because there was something admirable about seeing someone navigate the world so skillfully despite such a huge challenge. That's when I spotted trouble coming from the opposite direction. This woman was walking down the sidewalk like she owned the place. She had that classic haircut, you know the one, short, choppy, with those aggressive layers. She was completely absorbed in her phone, typing away, probably leaving some poor business a 1-star review. I could see what was about to happen before it did. The girl with the cane was walking straight, staying in her lane, while this woman was weaving all over the sidewalk with her face buried in her phone. Sure enough, they collided. The woman's phone went flying and she let out this dramatic gasp like she'd been personally attacked. She started yelling at the girl, telling her to watch where she was going and calling her names. The woman was furious about almost dropping her phone. The girl immediately started apologizing. She explained very politely that she couldn't see and that sometimes accidents like this were hard to avoid. Now, any reasonable person would have realized their mistake at this point, but not this woman. Instead of apologizing for not watching where she was going, she actually stepped closer to the girl and gave her a shove. She told the girl to find a corner to sit in and never walk around the streets again. My jaw hit the ground. So did everyone else's who was watching. There were probably 6 or 7 other people nearby, and we all just stood there in shock. Who does that to a blind person? The girl kept her composure better than I would have. She told the woman that what she did was completely uncalled for, and that she had just as much right to be there as anyone else. But challenging this woman was apparently the worst thing the girl could have done. The woman spun around with this look of pure rage. She screamed at the girl, asking how she dared to talk back to her. Then she did something I'll never forget as long as I live. She slapped the girl right across the face. Hard. The force knocked the girl's glasses clean off and sent her cane flying. The poor kid stumbled and fell backward onto the concrete. The woman stood over her and yelled that maybe that would teach her some respect. The girl was on the ground, clearly hurt and starting to cry. Her hands were scraped from trying to break her fall, and she was feeling around desperately for her glasses and cane. Meanwhile, this psycho woman was standing over her, screaming like a complete maniac. She kept yelling about how that's what the girl got for not watching where she was going, and that next time she should stay home where she belonged. I was about to step in myself when someone else beat me to it. This tall guy who'd been walking with his 2 young daughters had seen the whole thing. He quickly told his girls to go help the teenager while he approached the crazy woman. The man told the woman very calmly to step away from the girl right now. The woman told him to mind his own business and insisted that the girl had run into her. The man said he had seen what happened and that the woman had just assaulted a disabled minor. Then he told her she was under arrest. That's when he pulled out his badge and handcuffs. Turns out the guy was a United States Marshal. Talk about karma. The woman went absolutely ballistic, screaming that he couldn't arrest her and that she hadn't done anything wrong. She kept insisting the girl was the one who had caused the problem. The marshal very calmly told her she had the right to remain silent and suggested she use it. The woman went absolutely ballistic when he cuffed her. She was screaming about how this was discrimination, how she was going to sue everyone, how the girl was faking being blind. Just completely unhinged stuff. The marshal stayed calm the entire time like he dealt with people like this every day. Meanwhile, his daughters who couldn't have been older than 10, were being incredibly sweet to the girl on the ground. They found her glasses and cane and helped her sit up properly. One of them even had tissues in her backpack. One of the daughters asked if she was okay and said that the lady was really mean. The girl thanked them for helping and told them they were very kind. I went over to see if I could help too. The girl was shaken up but trying to stay strong. She had some scrapes on her palms and was still pretty upset, but she wasn't letting it break her. I told her that I had seen everything that happened and that the woman was completely out of line. The girl thanked me for saying that and mentioned that sometimes she wondered if people thought she was just making excuses. While we waited for backup to arrive, the marshal, who introduced himself as Dave, took statements from all the witnesses. Pretty much everyone had seen the assault, and a couple people had even recorded it on their phones. Marshal Dave explained that this was going to be charged as a felony assault. He said that given it was motivated by the victim's disability, they would probably add hate crime enhancements. The girl seemed surprised by this. She said she just wanted to make sure this didn't happen to someone else. Marshal Dave assured her that it wouldn't, not if he had anything to say about it. When the backup officers arrived, they took the screaming woman away. She was still yelling about how everyone was wrong and she was the real victim. It was honestly embarrassing to watch. Before the girl left, she thanked the marshal and his daughters again. She also exchanged contact information with me and the other witnesses in case we were needed for the court case. I asked if she was going to be okay getting home. She told me her mom was coming to pick her up and that this kind of thing didn't usually happen. But when it did, it really shook her up. Over the next few weeks, I followed the case because I was genuinely invested in seeing what would happen. The girl decided to press full charges, and honestly, good for her. She wasn't just seeking revenge, she wanted to send a message that people can't treat disabled individuals like garbage. She got herself a lawyer who specialized in discrimination cases. They built a solid case using witness statements, the phone videos, and the girl's medical records from the hospital visit after the assault. The legal team argued that this wasn't just a simple assault. It was a hate crime motivated by discrimination against disabled people. They pointed out how the woman specifically targeted the girl because of her blindness and made comments about how she should stay home where she belonged. The case took about 4 months to work its way through the system. During that time, I learned more about the girl. Her name was never released publicly because she was a minor, but through our conversations, I found out she was 17, had been blind since birth, and was an incredibly talented musician. She played piano and violin and was planning to study music therapy in college. When the verdict came down, I made sure to be in the courtroom. The woman was found guilty of felony assault with hate crime enhancements. The judge sentenced her to 5 years in prison and ordered her to pay significant restitution for medical bills, therapy costs, and emotional damages. When she heard 5 years, her jaw dropped, and she started that familiar screaming routine again. The woman yelled that this was ridiculous and that 5 years for barely touching some girl was insane. She screamed that the justice system was broken. The judge responded that her actions were deliberate, cruel, and motivated by discrimination. He said the sentence reflected the seriousness of hate crimes in their society. I spent 4 years as a police officer in a tiny rural department with only 15 officers total. Those years taught me more about dealing with entitled people than I ever wanted to know. This story happened during my 3rd year on the force, and it shows how some people in power think rules only apply to everyone else. I never really cared about writing tickets for minor stuff. My philosophy was simple. If you're not driving drunk without insurance or being completely reckless, I probably wasn't going to ruin your day over going 10 miles per hour over the speed limit. I had bigger fish to fry, and honestly, most people in our small town were decent folks just trying to get by. Our department had been dealing with budget cuts and staffing issues for months. We were stretched thin, covering a lot of ground with not enough people. The chief was always on us about being more proactive in enforcement, but I preferred building relationships with the community over harassing people for minor violations. Then came the incident that changed everything. We had a fatal accident where a child was hit by a car on the main road leading to the interstate. It was tragic, and even though speed wasn't a factor, the kid just wasn't being watched properly. The chief decided we needed to crack down hard on speeding in that area. Fair enough, I thought. Safety first. For weeks after that, I stopped every single car going even 1 mile per hour over the limit. I explained the situation to each driver, told them about the accident, and asked them to be more careful. Most people understood completely and thanked me for doing my job. But a few entitled jerks decided they were too important to be inconvenienced by a traffic stop, even when I explained why. These complainers went straight to City Hall whining about being stopped for minor infractions. Instead of backing up their officers who were trying to prevent another tragedy, the department caved to the pressure. My sergeant called me into his office with new orders. My sergeant told me that the chief wanted me to dial back the proactive enforcement and just be more visible out there. When I asked if that meant sitting in my car instead of doing actual police work, he said that those were indeed the orders. He said I should make myself visible but stop pulling people over for minor stuff. I was furious, but I decided to follow orders exactly as given. If they wanted me to be visible, I was going to be the most visible officer they'd ever seen. For the next several nights, I parked my patrol car directly in front of City Hall with my steady burn lights on, the ones that stay lit but don't flash. I sat there for hours at a time doing absolutely nothing productive. No community policing, no traffic enforcement, no real police work at all. Just sitting there like a decoration. Being the dedicated employee I was, I even took photos of myself in my patrol car to send to my supervisor, documenting exactly how visible I was being. The pictures showed me sitting there, completely motionless, while actual police work went undone elsewhere in town. It didn't take long before I got called in again. The chief angrily asked me what the hell I thought I was doing. I told him that I was following orders and being very visible. He said I knew that wasn't what they meant and ordered me to get back to normal patrol duties. I asked if he wanted me to go back to stopping speeders then, and he just told me to do my job normally. The whole speeding enforcement thing quietly went away after that. But it wasn't the end of my battles with entitled leadership. A few months later, we got another brilliant order from the top. The mayor had apparently driven through town and noticed some yards with tall weeds. Instead of dealing with actual crime or public safety issues, he decided this was our department's top priority. The chief told us that the mayor wanted us to start ticketing people for long weeds in their yards because he said it was a fire hazard. When I asked if he was serious about writing tickets for landscaping issues when we didn't have enough officers to handle real crimes, the chief said it wasn't up for debate. He explained that we were dividing the town into quadrants, and each officer would be responsible for enforcement in their area. The whole thing was ridiculous from the start. Most properties in our town didn't even have clear property lines between private land and city property. Half the weedy areas people complained about were actually city-owned strips between the road and people's fences. Nobody could tell me who was responsible for maintaining what. Even worse, the city's own properties were the worst offenders. We had multiple brush fires that summer, and almost all of them started on city land that hadn't been maintained. But somehow that didn't matter. Only private citizens needed to be harassed about their yard work. I refused to write weed tickets. It was stupid, hypocritical, and a waste of everyone's time. For a few weeks, I managed to avoid the whole mess by focusing on actual police work. Then we caught a suicide case. A middle-aged guy who'd been struggling with depression ended his life in a parking lot downtown. My partner, who was still new to the job, was the primary investigator, and I was helping him through the process. It's never easy dealing with something like that, especially for a rookie. Right in the middle of our investigation, with the body still on scene and evidence to collect, the mayor showed up. Not to offer support or ask if we needed anything, no. He had spotted the house with tall weeds on his way over and wanted immediate action. The mayor told the chief that he had seen a house on Oak Street with weeds that had to be 3 feet tall, saying this was exactly what he had been talking about. The chief then ordered me to go with the mayor and handle this right away. When I pointed out that we were in the middle of a death investigation and asked if it could wait, the chief said the mayor's concerns were a priority and told me to go deal with the weeds. We had a dead body, evidence to process, and a grieving family to notify, but tall grass was somehow more important. The entitlement was staggering. So I went to the house with the mayor, who spent 10 minutes pointing out every blade of grass that offended him. The homeowner wasn't even there to defend themselves. The mayor told me to look at the mess and said he wanted them cited immediately. I assured him that I would investigate the matter thoroughly. That's when I decided to investigate exactly as thoroughly as possible. I went back to the station and pulled up every city ordinance related to code enforcement. Turns out there were very specific procedures that had to be followed, with mandatory waiting periods and documentation requirements. First, I had to document the current state of the weeds with photographs and measurements. Then I had to wait a specified period to ensure they were in ongoing violation. Only then could I notify the homeowner, who would get a certain number of days to comply before any citation could be issued. The process was designed to be fair to property owners, but it also meant that any case that couldn't be resolved in a single shift had to go to our investigations division for follow-up. That gave me an idea. I spent the next 3 days driving through every street in my assigned quadrant with a camera and measuring tape. I documented every single property that had grass longer than city standards, and that turned out to be almost every house in town, including numerous city-owned properties. For each violation, I opened a separate case file. I took multiple photographs from different angles, measured the grass height with a ruler, and wrote detailed reports about each property's non-compliance. I made sure to note in every report which nearby city properties were also in violation, so homeowners would see the hypocrisy if they requested copies of their case files. I attached property owner information, license plate numbers of cars and driveways, and cross-referenced everything with city records. Each report was 3 or 4 pages long, and I copied and pasted the same thorough narrative into every single case. When I was done, I had opened 47 separate case files for weed violations. Every single one got forwarded to investigations for follow-up since they couldn't be resolved in one shift. The investigations division consisted of exactly one detective who was already overloaded with actual crimes. Suddenly, his desk was buried under dozens of weed cases that would take weeks to process properly. Meanwhile, I changed my patrol car's wireless network name to Weeds Enforcement Officer so anyone checking Wi-Fi signals when I was around would see it. It was my little reminder of how ridiculous the whole situation was. The detective came to find me the next day and asked if I was out of my mind for dumping 50 weed cases on his desk. I told him I was just following proper procedure since the city code was very specific about how these cases had to be handled. He pointed out that half of the cases were city properties, and I explained that I documented violations where I found them without discriminating. Within a week, all the weed enforcement orders quietly disappeared. Nobody ever mentioned tall grass again, and my wireless network name stayed the same until I finally quit and moved to a decent department 6 months later. Later, when I found out the mayor had received copies of several case reports from homeowners who were disputing their potential citations, he was not happy to see detailed documentation of how city property was just as bad as anything on private land. My sergeant ended up resigning shortly after I did when some shady stuff went down in the department. Before he left, he gave me a custom award that read, "Most Literal Officer Ever." I've been working as a veterinary technician for about 5 years now. Long hours, emotionally draining work, but I love animals, so it's worth it. My husband works in construction, and we both put in serious hours during the week. Weekends are sacred to us. It's our only time to actually relax and recharge. We have 2 dogs, both rescues from the clinic where I work. They're sweet but high energy, and my husband absolutely spoils them rotten. I mean, these dogs eat better than we do some nights. They have their own bedroom, custom beds, and my husband literally talks to them like they're human children. Don't get me wrong, I love our dogs, but sometimes I think he forgets they're animals. Anyway, last Saturday I had finally gotten a weekend off after working 3 straight weekends covering for a coworker who was out sick. I was exhausted and just wanted to sleep in, maybe order takeout and watch movies. Simple, right? But my husband had other plans. He told me the dogs needed exercise that day since they'd been cooped up all week while we were working. I suggested he could just take them to the dog park because I really needed to rest. But he had his heart set on taking all of us to the beach together, saying the dogs love the water and it would be fun. I tried to explain that I was really tired and reminded him how crazy the dogs get at the beach. I told him about last time when I spent 2 hours washing sand out of everything afterward. He kept insisting it would be relaxing, that we'd get fresh air and sunshine, and I could just sit and read while they played. I should have stuck to my guns, but I felt guilty. These dogs mean the world to him, and I didn't want to be the mean wife who ruins everyone's fun. So I agreed. We packed up the car with enough supplies for a week-long camping trip. Dog toys, multiple towels, a cooler full of treats, portable water bowls, and even a beach umbrella specifically for the dogs in case they got too hot. I brought one small book and figured I'd find a quiet spot to read. The beach was absolutely packed when we arrived. Families everywhere, kids building sand castles, people trying to enjoy peaceful picnics. We found a spot, and I immediately noticed other beachgoers eyeing our dogs nervously. Both of ours are big breeds and can be intimidating to people who don't know them. Within minutes of letting them off their leashes, chaos began. They started digging massive holes in the sand, sending it flying everywhere. A family nearby got sand all over their lunch and started shooting us dirty looks. I suggested maybe we should leash them back up since they were disturbing other people. My husband brushed off my concerns, saying they were just being dogs and everyone needed to relax. Then this woman approached us. She was probably in her 50s, wearing an expensive-looking swimsuit. She told us our animals were being very disruptive and explained that her grandchildren were trying to build sandcastles, but our dogs kept running through them. My husband apologized but said the dogs were just excited to be there. Karen demanded to know if we couldn't control them, complaining that some people had paid good money for beach parking and shouldn't have to deal with this disruption. I started to apologize and offered to move our dogs to a different area, but my husband cut me off. He told her that this was a public beach where dogs were allowed as long as they were under voice control, which he claimed ours were. Karen pointed out that under control was hardly accurate since they just destroyed her grandson's sand castle and gotten sand all over their blanket. I tried to offer help cleaning up, but Karen was already worked up and my husband was getting defensive. Karen said she didn't want our help and demanded that we leash those beasts or leave. My husband got offended and insisted they weren't beasts but family members and declared we weren't going anywhere. The situation kept escalating. Karen started taking pictures of our dogs with her phone, claiming she was going to report us to beach patrol. My husband got more stubborn and refused to budge. Meanwhile, our dogs were completely oblivious to the drama and continued wreaking havoc. They knocked over someone's beach chair while chasing a frisbee. They shook sand all over a couple trying to sunbathe. One of them even grabbed someone's sandwich right out of their hand and ran off with it. I told my husband this was getting out of hand and we needed to go. He refused, saying we weren't going to let that entitled woman ruin our day. Karen overheard and angrily protested that she wasn't entitled for expecting basic courtesy. My husband shot back that she was entitled for thinking she owned a public beach. Things got worse when Beach Patrol actually showed up. Apparently, Karen had flagged down an officer and complained about us. The officer was polite but firm, explaining that he needed us to leash our dogs because they'd received multiple complaints about them being disruptive. My husband challenged this, asking what the actual rule was and whether leashed dogs were required or just needed to be under control. The officer explained that dogs needed to be under effective control at all times, and if they were disturbing other beachgoers, that wasn't effective control. I was mortified. Here I am, a professional who works with animals, getting lectured about pet control on a public beach. But my husband kept arguing, complaining that it didn't seem fair that one person's complaint meant we had to leave. The officer corrected him, explaining it wasn't just one person but that he'd received 3 separate complaints in the last 10 minutes. That's when I'd had enough. I told him we were leaving right then and there. I started gathering our stuff while my husband reluctantly leashed the dogs. But Karen wasn't done yet. She smugly told us good and suggested that maybe next time we'd think twice before bringing our untrained animals to disturb families trying to enjoy their weekend. My husband started to respond, but I grabbed his arm and told him not to engage, that we were going. When we walked back to the car, I could feel everyone's eyes on us. Parents pulling their kids closer, people shaking their heads. I wanted to disappear. The drive home was tense. My husband kept muttering about entitled people and how unfair the whole situation was. I finally exploded, telling him this was exactly why I didn't want to come and that he never listened. When I tried to tell him the dogs weren't ready for situations like this, he insisted they were fine and that woman was just looking for something to complain about. I countered by pointing out they'd destroyed 3 sandcastles, knocked over a chair, and stolen someone's food, asking how that was fine. He defended them by saying they were dogs, and dogs do dog things. I told him that was exactly the problem. He treated them like they could do no wrong, and then acted surprised when other people got upset. We didn't speak for the rest of the drive. When we got home, I immediately started researching dog training classes. If we're going to have these dogs in public, they need to be properly trained. Period. The next morning, my husband came to me with coffee and an apology. He admitted I was right and that he'd gotten so defensive that he'd stopped thinking about how our dogs were affecting other people. I explained that I just wanted to be able to take them places without causing a scene. He told me he'd found a training class that started the following week and had already signed us up. It's been 2 weeks since the beach incident. We've been to 3 training sessions, and our dogs are already showing improvement. My husband has also started acknowledging when they're getting overstimulated instead of just dismissing concerns. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.